Hi everyone, in this video we will discuss the Cycles default shaders. So let's begin. I've just created a basic scene where I added a monkey head, a plane and a UV sphere. All this can be done by pressing Shift A, mesh, and then plane, monkey and UV sphere. Then I just positioned them as such. I also added a sun lamp and given it a power of about 1 with a slightly yellow tinge color. I also added a sky texture. And finally, I changed from Blender render to the Cycles render. So without further ado, let's now get into the shader system. I'm going to go ahead and select the Suzanne head, and I'm going to go ahead and change to the rendered viewport shading mode. So we can see right now, all our materials in our world look bland and boring. They're just one color. So let's now go ahead and give some of our objects some shaders. So to do that, you'll have to go to the Materials tab of the Properties window. With our Suzanne head selected, I'm just going to go ahead and press New. After that, we can also preview what our material will look like here as well. The first shader we're going to look at is the Diffuse shader. The Diffuse shader is the default shader in Blender. It takes in a color input and displays it as is. So our light rays just bounce off this object just as usual. So I can change this to say a blue color and it will show up as blue in the viewport. I can change this sphere to, or also create a material for this. I can give this an orange color. So just click on the color input, choose a color, and there you go. It doesn't have to always be a color. You can click on this button next to the color input and add an image texture. But I'm just going to stick to a default color just for this tutorial purpose. So that is the default shader. You just input a color and it displays it as is. The diffuse shader is the most common shader and you can use it for almost any type of object. Whether you want to create the shaders for the walls in your room or a toy or a desk or whatever you name it, a door, the diffuse shader most times can look okay. The next shader we're going to look at is the glossy shader. This shader is used to make your object shiny and reflective. So everything is reflective here. So if I just quickly select my sphere by right clicking and Shift D, I'm just going to put it slightly above the Suzanne head. So grab Y, let's move it here, grab X. You can see that there is reflection going on in the Suzanne head. So it is completely reflective. Let's just bring it a little closer. Alright, so you can see that the orange ball is being reflected off the Suzanne head. Let's just select that again. If I increase the roughness of this, it starts to become less reflective and shiny. So as you can see, the orange ball starts to become a little bit less reflective. And the higher you go, the less the shininess and the reflectiveness. So if I go to about that value, it starts to look a bit like plastic or copper or something. And in the higher it goes, I guess it starts to look more like a diffuse shader. So if I go to 0, it is completely shiny and reflective. And go to 1, it is rarely shiny and reflective. You would use a glossy shader for simulating anything that is shiny and reflective. So for example, a mirror or a car paint or a trophy or a wine glass, I don't know, whatever you name it. The next shader is a glass shader. So the glass shader simulates, well, glass. So as you can see, a little bit of our orange sphere, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this now, I don't need that. And then move the sphere slightly to the back. You can see that a little bit of so light penetrates through this object and it reflects and refracts. So you can see a bit of that orange ball being reflected and refracted off the Suzanne head. And the roughness here determines the glassiness of the glass, if that makes sense. So if I make it more rough, it starts to look more like foggy glass and it doesn't reflect as much. And when I put it to 0, it starts to become like 100% glass, where it's completely see-through. So that's one way to make foggy looking glass, and that's one way to make it look like foggy thick looking glass, and this is one way to make it look like completely see-through glass. The IOR stands for index of refraction, and it is used to help more accurately determine the type of glass that you want. So I came across a forum post on the Blender Artists forum where someone has generously posted the IOR values for common types of objects such as air, which is always 1, ice, water, glass, light glass, standard glass. So all these types of glassy type objects you can set IOR values for to get a more realistic representation of the glass of specific glass type objects. So you would obviously use the glass shader for glassy objects. So for example, a window or even someone's glasses. So moving right along is the transparent shader. So the transparent shader is not really like glass, it is just simply a transparent object, a see-through object. So it is not photorealistic, it is just used for specific purposes in a Blender. So if I just change it to white, you'll notice that it is completely see-through. It's almost like an invisibility cloak for you Harry Potter fans out there. So it is completely invisible there. You might be thinking, what's the point of having this? There is a point to having this. You'll find out why when we work on our exercise in the final video of this section. So next shader is a translucent shader. The translucent shader is where light penetrates through the object and a little bit of light seeps through the back of the object. So there doesn't have to be a light source on the back of the object, it just sort of penetrates from the front of the object. This sort of ties in with the subsurface scattering shader. So subsurface scattering shader is a little bit different from a translucent. Basically a subsurface scattering is where light sort of penetrates to the object, so it acts as a sort of volume, and the light enters from a different direction. It's a little bit complicated to explain. There's a lot of physics and maths behind this, which I'm not even an expert at. But basically you would use a subsurface scattering for things like milk or yogurt or jelly, and perhaps the most popular use of the subsurface scattering, human skin. The next shader is the velvet shader. You would use the velvet shader to simulate soft cloth type materials. So if you want to create like a nice red shiny cloth, you would probably use something like the velvet shader. So it looks a bit odd on a Suzanne head, but if you have a skirt model and apply this velvet shader, it will actually look like a nice smooth looking cloth. So you would probably use the velvet shader for things like the carpet or clothes or curtains and things like that. The other shaders, there's a little bit too much to go through. The volume absorption and the volume scatter, they can be used to simulate things like fog and haze. The toon shader can be used to simulate a cartoony sort of look. It's not very photorealistic, but that option is there. We have a hair shader, which is a little bit advanced. If you have an object that has hair which is created by particle hair strands, this hair shader can help you simulate nice realistic looking hair. It is really good. It can actually make your hair look like Pixar hair. We also have an emission shader. Emission shader is basically a light source. So it is using your object as a light source. So in addition to all the lamps that you have in Blender, such as the sun lamp and the spot lamp and all that stuff, you can also use your object as a lamp. So the main uses of this is, for example, if you have a car driving at night, you can use part of your headlight mesh as an emission lamp so that it looks like the car is shining light on the road. You can also use this for the lights on a train. The lights on a train can sometimes be like these square shaped lights, and you can obviously use a cube and then make that a light source, so it sort of simulates that sort of train lighting. Another final shader that I want to show you is the mix shader. So the mix shader is used to mix two different shaders. So for example, I can choose a glossy shader, and I can also choose to mix it with, say, an emission shader. So I can make it 100% glossy, and as you can see we have, and I can maybe change the color of this to say blue of some sort, and let's make it a higher strength. Oops, that's too strong. So you can see that we've created a material that is both shiny, reflective, and emits light. I don't know what type of object this will be in real life, probably some alien-like object, because I don't know of any material on Earth that has this type of material. When you start to work on texturing and shading for more complex projects, you will realize that you'll rely on the mix shader quite a bit. So for example, when you want to simulate human skin, there's actually a lot of shaders that go into it. Subsurface scattering, diffuse, a bit of glossy, and things like that. And you might have to mix multiple glossies and multiple diffusers and multiple subsurface scattering to get a more realistic result. So that's what we'll look at in basic detail in the next video. We will use the node system to organize all that nicely. So I hope this video has been useful. Play around with the shaders, keep blending, and I hope to see you in the next video.